Get started. My name is Johnnie Barton. I am Chief Counsel to the Office of Open Government, or OOG, and I want to thank you all for taking time out to attend today's training on OMA best practices. Director Allen and Attorney Advisor DeBerry just completed a FOIA training prior to this training on open meetings. And the question some might have is, why are we talking about FOIA and open meetings during ethics weeks? That's because there's a correlation between ethics and transparency in government. Where the government is open and transparent, things tend to be more ethical rather than unethical. The goal of today's presentation is to present you with 10 best practice tips for complying with the OMA. Next slide, please. The OOG's mission is to ensure that government operations at every level are transparent and open to the public and promote civic engagement. Next slide, please. I'll give you just a brief background on the OOG and what we have jurisdiction over. The OOG is responsible for two statutes, the Open Meetings Act and DC FOIA. In regard to the Open Meetings Act, the OOG issues binding advisory opinions on compliance with the Open Meeting Act. Except opinions issued on the director's own initiative or sui sponte, a person may appeal those opinions to the board. The OOG also provides advice to agencies on complying with FOIA requests and to requesters on submission of proper FOIA requests. The OOG also issues non-binding but instructive advisory opinions on compliance with DC FOIA. Next slide, please. The OOG is here to help you to comply with the Open Meetings Act. True, it is our responsibility statutorily to enforce the OMA, but we do it in such a way that we try to help you to comply with it, but we need some help from you in order to do that. So in order for us to help you, we need a little help from you. Next slide, please. Here's an example why it's important to make sure that your administrative point of contact, or we like to call APOC information, is current on your website and on file with the OOG. Next slide, please. Board of Sidewalk Repair Notice of Public Meeting. The District of Columbia Board of Sidewalk Repair will hold a meeting at 12 p.m. Due to the continuing public health crisis, the board will meet remotely. Below is a draft agenda for the meeting. A final meeting agenda will be posted on the board's website at dcboardofsidewalkrepair.org. So we know that in order to meet, we have to first notify the public of the fact that we're going to hold a meeting. This is illustrative of a notice of a meeting, and I want us to take a good look at it and read over it real slowly and try to remember what it says, because as we continue on, we're going to ask some questions about the validity of this notice. Okay, next slide, please. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting. In order to register for and attend the meeting, please visit, and it has the website, the event number, and the event password or phone number. So again, try to make a mental picture of what was in this meeting notice. Next slide, please. Question is there anything wrong with the meeting notice? So we're going to have a couple of responses for you to look at and to ponder upon mentally and make your selection as to which is the correct response. And then we'll go over that, go over the responses. Next slide, please. The choices are: the notice complies with the OMA, is short and to the point, easy to follow and understand. The notice only lacks a draft meeting agenda, otherwise it's fine. That's response B. Response C, the notice lacks the date, a draft meeting agenda, and notice of intent to enter closed session, if applicable, and the notification that this meeting is governed by the Open Meetings Act. Please address any questions or complaints arising under this meeting to the Office of Open Government at opengovoffice@dc.gov. So those are your three choices. I hope you could remember some of the things that were in the notice and make your selection A, B, or C. Next slide, please. And C is the correct answer. I probably gave it away because C was the one that was most inclusive, but C is in fact the correct answer. The meeting notice has to have all of those components. And again, we'll go into detail a little bit later. Next slide, please. Notice requirements. Notice must include time, date, location, and proposed or planned agenda. If there will be a closed session, notice must include the OMA citation from DC Official Code Section 2-575B and state the reason justifying the closure. And that's found in DC Official Code Section 2-5765. So in order to be a valid notice under the OMA, it has to include all of the information listed here and in DC Official Code 2-5765. Next slide, please. So it's 72 hours and 3 business days before the meeting. That's great. OOG staff, and we do this routinely, we monitor public bodies' notices, meeting agendas, and public record publications on either the central meeting calendar or on the board's website. And there's a reason why we do so. That's great. OOG staff looks on the central meeting calendar and the Board of Sidewalk Repairs website for its administrative point of contacts information. However, the listed information is for someone no longer with the agency. The OG diligently tries to contact someone on the Sidewalk Repair Board for 2 days. So we're now down from 72 hours down to 24 hours. However, OOG's telephone calls and emails about the issue go unanswered. We don't get a response, and we can only contact based on the information that we have that's available to us. And we do a good job of trying to find that information out when it's not posted either on the central meeting calendar or on the website. We even contact members of the board in an attempt to correct some deficiencies with a meeting notice. But here's why it's so important that we have that information. Next slide, please. If we have that information, we are able to contact you timely, hopefully, and to let you know that your meeting notice is defective, provide information about how to cure it, and then you're able to continue on and have your meeting as planned. If it gets down to less than 48 hours or 2 business days before the meeting, under the OMA, that meeting cannot occur because you have not properly noticed the public. Here's a slide from the central meeting calendar that lists the contact information for the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability's point of contact. It lists the mayor oral or enabling legislation. It lists an acronym, but most importantly to us, it lists the point of contact, telephone number, and email, the person who may be responsible for putting up your notices or for putting up your meeting records, so that we can contact that person and to notify them as to what, if there's a problem, and how to correct the problem timely. Next slide, please. So again, this is what the central meeting calendar lists. In our scenario, if the information was correct and the OOG was able to contact the administrative point of contact, or APOC, in time, corrections to the meeting notice would allow the meeting to proceed. Next slide, please. So here's our best practice tip number 1. Please ensure and update your administrative point of contact, or APOC's, information with our office and on your website. Again, that will help us to know who to contact, hopefully well in advance of the deadline for a meeting notice, so that we can provide any corrective information so that the public body can meet and cure any problem with the Open Meetings Act. Next slide, please. How much public notice of meetings is required? This is a question, and here are your 3 choices. 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. B, 72 hours or 3 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. Or C, as much notice as possible, but not less than 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. Again, 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. 72 hours or 3 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. C, as much notice as possible, but not less than 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before the meeting. So please make your mental selection. And we'll go to the next slide for the correct response, or in this case, responses. How much notice is necessary? Notice meets the letter of the law when it is not less than 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, before a meeting, DC official code. So A is correct, but C is also correct. And I prefer C rather than A for this reason. Next slide, please. There's some overlooked language in DC Official Code 2-576A. And that overlooked language is a public body shall provide notice as early as possible. The default language, of course, is correct and is the letter of the law, 48 hours or 2 business days. You'll be complying with the law. But if your public body meets regularly, say monthly, it's okay, and it's probably preferred to go ahead and list those monthly meetings as early as possible with, of course, your planned meeting agenda, which is subject to to change, but to list it as early as possible. Again, if there is an issue with time, you have it listed as early as possible, and there's an issue with the notice, then you're able to correct it. If it's done at the proverbial last minute, and we see that there's an issue with the notice, and it's outside of the parameters of what's acceptable, 48 hours or 2 business days, whichever is greater, then the public body is not lawfully meeting if it conducts that meeting. Next slide, please. So build in some cushion in case there's an issue with your notice, especially your notice with the DC Register. Because under the OMA, you have to also publish notice of your upcoming meeting in the DC Register. And we know that the Register has some specific requirements for publication. So earlier is better. If you have to do it at the 48 hours or 2 business days on occasion, go ahead, but earlier is better, especially to build in that cushion in case there's a defective notice. Next slide, please. So best practice tip number 2, notice the public as early as possible. And again, for reasons that have already been stated, if there is a problem with the notice, we can correct it. You can correct it and go on and meet. If it's late and it's too late today, so to speak, then that the public body won't be able to meet because the law, the OMA specifically states before a public body meets, it has to notify the public within what the statute requires. Next slide, please. Again, opening soon. Public knows that you're going to meet early, then they can put it, they can make themselves available to attend the meeting, knowing well in advance when it's going to occur. Next slide, please. Be careful if you recycle. And of course, we're in a world where recycling is a good thing. We like to recycle our plastics, our papers, our cardboard, but sometimes recycling an OMA public notice can be problematic. We've noticed on several occasions that public body point of contact has recycled a notice, and it's okay to do so, but we want to be careful and make sure that we update the notice so that it's correct and does not have some of the old information that's applicable to a prior meeting for an upcoming meeting. Next slide, please. When we're using an old meeting notice, be sure to update the date, time, meeting link, or dial-in number, the reasons for going into closure, if applicable, and the corresponding citations. Failure to do so may result in inability to conduct the meeting. Again, this would be a defective notice. If the notice doesn't have the proper date, we've seen notices for a meeting, say on October 1st, but it references September 21st as the date, and of course that date is already expired, and it's not a good meeting. It's not a good meeting notice because it's not proper. So it has to have that information. If we're meeting in public, of course, it's going to have the place, date, time, etc. But again, this is also a good reason why you want to notice as early as possible, so that if there is an issue, it can be corrected. Next slide, please. So best practice tip number 3, be sure to update a reused or recycled meeting notice. Next slide, please. Meeting minutes, transcripts, or recording. What does the OMA require, and what does DC FOIA have to do with it? Okay, I'm going to pause for just a minute. I see a question in the chat. Does the information about your notice need to be included for every public meeting notice in the district? Under our regulations, the information, and I'm assuming the information you are talking about is the information that this meeting is governed by the Open Meetings Act. If you have any questions or concerns, please notify the Office of Open Government. That information should be listed at the bottom of all meeting agendas according to the OOG's regulations. Yeah, another question. Does the attach an agenda requirement also apply to notice in the DC Register? Under the OMA, a meeting notice has to include a planned meeting agenda. And because the information under the regulations that this office is, this meeting is governed by the Open Meetings Act, that information should be on your draft meeting agenda that's submitted to the DC Register as well. Is there a specific place you would like to see the information on the public body's website? I think right now there is most public bodies on their website have a About tab, and then that tab is usually the information about FOIA and the OMA. That would be a good place for it. However, anywhere that is easy for the public to find the information about I'm assuming this is information about the administrative point of contact information. The easier it is to locate, the better it is for us. There's a question also when I look at the OOG meeting calendar, I don't see anything populated. Is there a way we can verify a meeting is properly listed? I'm going to ask that person to contact me offline, and I'll put you in contact with our IT person, Mr. Kavan Bridges, who will be able to better assist you with that response. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Meeting minutes, transcripts, or recording, what does the OMA require, and what does DC FOIA have to do with it? Next slide, please. Under the OMA, all meetings must be recorded by electronic means. And that's both sessions, whether the meeting is held in an open session or a closed session. So all meetings must be recorded by electronic means. However, sometimes things happen with technology, and if it is impracticable to record the meeting by electronic means under the OMA, you may take detailed meeting minutes. While the electronic recording is mandatory, the meeting minutes, or in some instances, some public bodies use a professional transcript service or transcript are not. Some public bodies do both electronic recordings and meeting minutes or transcripts. And here's why that's a good thing. The OG is also implying that you should post the recordings to your website if you have the capability to do so. Otherwise, they should be made available to the public upon request. In both instances, you must do so within 7 business days of the meeting. So with the recording, if you have the capability to, you should post it on your website or on our central meeting calendar, and you must do so within 7 business days of the meeting. In the event that it's impractical to record the meeting electronically and you have to take detailed meeting minutes, we, under the OMA, those detailed meeting minutes, and these should be draft meeting minutes because they're subject to approval, which normally does not take place until the next meeting of the public body. So you're going to post draft meeting minutes within 3 days with a notation at the top that they're subject to approval and will be approved at the next regularly scheduled meeting of the public body. Here's why it's a good idea to also take meeting minutes, or if your public body does a transcript, to also do that as well. By posting the recording or meeting minutes to your website or to the central meeting calendar, you also satisfy provision of DC FOIA that requires the minutes of all proceedings of public bodies be proactively disclosed and available on your website or on the internet. So if you record the meeting and you also take detailed meeting minutes and you don't have the capacity to put the recording on your website, then you can post the detailed meeting minutes or the transcript, and that will comply with both the OMA and with DC FOIA. Next slide, please. Best practice tip number 4, post your electronic recording, detailed meeting minutes, or transcript to your website. This also satisfies a requirement under DC FOIA. Next slide, please. Notice of an emergency meeting. Under the Open Meetings Act, you may conduct emergency meetings. The question is, how much public notice is required for an emergency meeting? Here are your 3 choices. You may conduct an emergency meeting, because it's an emergency meeting, without providing notice to the public. Response B, by providing the public the same notice as non-emergency meetings, which is as much notice as possible, but at least 48 hours or 2 business days before the meeting occurs. And response C, by providing notice to the public at the same time notice is given to members of the public body. So those are your 3 choices for notice of an emergency meeting. Make your mental selection, and we'll go to the next slide for the correct response. And the answer is C. Sometimes things happen where it's necessary for a public body to meet on an emergency basis. And under the OMA, you have to give notice to the public body at the same time notice is given to members of notice. You have to give notice to the public at the same time notice is given to members of the public body. And that is as much notice as possible given the circumstances. And it can be less notice than 48 hours or 2 business days. You have to comply with the other provisions of the OMA concerning notice. The physical notice requirement right now has been waived under emergency and temporary legislation due to the pandemic. And you can provide notice also by, of course, posting the notice to your website or to the central meeting calendar, which is probably the quickest way to do so under the circumstances. Next slide, please. Use a transition script. To ensure OMA compliance, it may be a good idea, especially if you have a new chair or someone who is chairing the meeting in place of your current chair, with a script that lists the protocol to transition from an open to a closed session and for emergency meetings, because there are specific requirements that have to take place in order to transition from an open to a closed session, and also when conducting an emergency meeting. So we'll go into that a little later, but it's easier to do so, and it makes things go a lot smoother if you have what we call a transition script, which pretty much lists what the law says for the public body to do or the chair to do, whether it's a moving from a closed session to an open session to a closed session, or in the event that there is a an emergency meeting. Next slide, please. So best practice tip number 5, prepare scripts for emergency meetings and entering closed sessions. Next slide, please. What if public body ABC frequently enters closed sessions for 3 reasons under the OMA and properly cites the OMA and provides a description of the reasons for entering closure? On its October 22, 2022 public meeting notice, the public body properly cites the OMA with a description of 2 of the 3 reasons it normally enters closed session. However, while in the closed session, the chair realizes they need to discuss another matter that would be a proper subject to discuss in the closed session. It was one of the 3 matters the public body normally discuss in the closed session. Can they discuss the additional matter? So the public body has listed 2 of the 3 reasons on this notice that it normally enters into a closed session. But once in the closed session, the chair realizes that they need to discuss that third item. Question is, can they discuss this third matter? Go to the next slide, please. Here are our responses. Yes, because it is a proper matter to be discussed in the closed session. No, because the statement of intent to close the meeting did not include a citation to the reason for closure under DC Official Code 2-575B and the description of the matter. No, because DC FOIA prevents the discussion. So make your mental selection of A, B, and C, or whether or not the chair can and the public body can discuss the third matter, which is not listed in the notice while they go into closed session, and it is a matter that is proper to discuss in a closed session. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. B is the correct response. So here's a best practice tip, and this is best practice tip number 6. If your public body generally goes into a closed session for the same reasons, include in your notice of intent the OMA citation and description for the matters that you normally or may have to discuss in the closed session. It's better to have it listed and not have to discuss it than to not have it listed and then need to discuss it. Because if it's not properly noticed, you can't discuss it, even though it's a proper subject to discuss in a closed session. Next slide, please. Protocol for emergency meetings. So again, this is going back to, it's best to have a script when you have to have an emergency meeting. When an emergency meeting is convened, the presiding officer shall open the meeting with a statement explaining the subject of the meeting, the nature of the emergency, and how public notice was provided. And that's found in DC Official Code Section 2-577D. If you've never gone into an emergency meeting or if it's done infrequently, then it's best to have a script that lays out these things so that the presiding officer can simply read it and move into the emergency meeting lawfully, because they have complied with what the OMA requires as the protocol for emergency meetings. Next slide, please. There's also protocol to enter a closed meeting. And again, this is what the law requires. It has to be done, or the entry into a closed session is not proper and violates the Open Meetings Act. DC Official Code Section 2-575C provides that before a meeting or portion of a meeting may be closed, the public body shall meet in a session at which a majority of the members of the public body present vote in favor of closure. Paragraph 2, the presiding officer shall make a statement providing the reason for closure, including citations from subsection B of this section, and the subjects to be discussed. Again, it's not simply saying we're going into a closed session. The public has a right to know why the public body is going into a closed session. So under the Open Meetings Act, the presiding officer has to make a statement providing the reason for closure, and that includes a citation from the OMA for the reason for going to subject and the subjects to be discussed. And the law also requires that the public body have a copy of that statement in writing to anyone in the public that requests it. Next slide, please. Again, that's why it's great to have a script. Description of matters to be discussed, less is better. Description of matters to be discussed in closed session, less is better. The OMA does not require you to delineate with specificity what the actual matter is. General information, a general description is better. It may be an issue that protects someone's privacy rights, so less is better. Board of Sidewalk Repairs must go into a closed session to discuss a disciplinary matter regarding an agency employee. The notice of intent to enter closure states, pursuant to DC Official Code Section 2-575B9, to discuss disciplinary matters concerning Peter Pan. We do not want to do this. We do not want to list, in particular, the individual that is the subject of a disciplinary matter for obvious reasons, for privacy reasons. Less is better. To discuss disciplinary matters is sufficient. You don't have to list Peter Pan's name. The OG has opined that descriptions of a general nature satisfy the notice requirements under DC Official Code Sections 2-575C1 and 2-5765. Next slide, please. So, best practice tip number 7. Under the OMA, the description of matters to be discussed in closed session should be general. And of course, unless there is something in your enabling legislation that provides otherwise, it should be general in nature. Next slide, please. What if there is a quorum at a holiday gathering? And we know that the OMA defines a meeting as any gathering of a quorum of the members of a public body, including hearings and roundtables, whether formal, informal, regular, special, or emergency, at which the members consider, conduct, or advise on public business. So, of course, before we can have a meeting, we have to have a quorum. One of the things that we need to know is we have to know our number, what the number is for a quorum. And generally, if it's not stated in your enabling legislation or your bylaws, it's half plus one or a simple majority. A meeting is not a chance or social gathering. Here's the caveat, provided that it is not held to avoid the provisions of the OMA. So, what if there's a quorum at a holiday gathering? Next slide, please. Again, if it's a social event or a chance encounter, no government business is being discussed, then it's not an open meeting and it's not a meeting subject to the OMA. With the holiday season coming up, we recommend that you remind your public body members to avoid any discussions of public business when a quorum is present, whether it's a social gathering or if a chance encounter occurs. Next slide, please. Help us help you. We are listening. During the OMA trainings for your public body, we can and will tactfully stress any areas of concern you tell us about. Again, we currently monitor remote meetings. We have been at meetings where we've seen something that may be problematic. We will send you a chat or contact you by phone and try to help you to clarify it and to correct it if at all possible. We can also provide advice again if we're asked while in attendance of meetings. Next slide, please. So best practice tip number 9, let us know any specific areas of concerns or issues that need emphasis during our trainings. Again, you all are deal with the members of the public body and the public body regularly. There may be some issues that are reoccurring that need to be stressed, and we're happy to stress those issues during our trainings so that it can clarify it for everyone involved. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Best practice tip 10 follows. Next slide, please. Electronic meetings. And a lot of public bodies are currently meeting remotely or electronically. Here's something that we advise, especially when you're going to go into a closed or an executive session. If an executive or closed session is needed, the OMG recommends that public body have 2 separate online meeting links. Remember that a roll call vote for an executive or closed session is needed in a public meeting before closing the meeting to members only. The public body must continue for the public meeting must continue for the duration of the executive or closed session. Once the executive closed session ends, the public body must re-enter the public meeting and report when appropriate anything that any official action that was taken in closure, and then adjourn the meeting. We also recommend that you test the meeting platform near the meeting time to ensure that it is accessible to the public body members and the public. Next slide, please. That is the end of our presentation. Again, I want to thank you all for attending. Before we go to the chat and see if there are any questions, I want to go to the slide that lists, the next slide, I believe, lists the members of the OOG staff. If you have any questions, you can contact Director Mikkel Allen, and there is her contact information, my contact information, Attorney Advisory Sherry DeBerry, there is her contact information. Next slide, please. Our trial attorney, Nicholas Wow, our IT specialist, Devon Bridges, who will assist you with any issues with signing up for the central meeting calendar or any issues with posting or publishing information to the central meeting calendar, his information as well. And our newest employee, paralegal specialist, Kimberly Brown, that is her contact information as well. Again, I'm going to thank you for taking time out to attend this training. A copy of the presentation will be made available to you, and we want to go to the chat and see if there are any unanswered questions. If a government body that has a standing monthly meeting, i.e. first Wednesday of each month, publishes the dates for the year in the DC Register, that notice would not be able to know in advance the specific proposed agenda items for each meeting that will occur. Therefore, should the public notice only post a notice a notice 1 month at a time so it can include the proposed agenda items for a particular meeting. That I will leave up to you. Again, it's a planned agenda. The agenda may change, and that's the reason for the 48 hours or 2 business days. You can always change the agenda if you don't. So it's up to you as to how you want to proceed on that. That's clearly up to you. But you can put a planned agenda in it, and of course, agendas change. And if it changes, then you have the 48-hour, 2 business days, or as much notice as possible after you've put it in the register to make any changes to the planned agenda. Yes, attendees will receive a copy of the PowerPoint of this training. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions. Again, if you do have some questions after the presentation, at any point, please feel free to contact anyone on the OOG staff, and we're happy to respond to it. And again, a copy of the presentation will be made available. If there are no other questions, again, we want to thank you. And again, we're here to help you, but we need your help in some instances so that we can help you. The best practice tip number 1 is to make sure that information, the administrative point of contact information, is up to date so that we're able to contact you in advance if there's an issue and get it clarified before, timely before your meeting occurs. Not seeing any more questions. Again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you at the other presentations during the remainder of Ethics Week. Enjoy the rest of your day, and bye-bye.